Hello, everyone. Once again, this is Dare to Speak, and I'm doing a video right now as a message for all the young kids in their mid teens to late teens and stuff like that concerning street gangs. And anyone who's watching who's either affiliated with either Spanish Cobras or Latin Kings, I just wanted to say that I pretty much know a fair amount, not as much as my brothers, but I know a fair amount of the situation with street gangs from my time period. The earliest remembrance was the Spanish Cobras, and this was, from what I do remember, was I was about maybe 6, almost 7 years old in 1978, and in the early year of 1979, when I was in grade school, and I remember coming home from school, and I would see the graffiti of the Spanish Cobras. I remember seeing the actual Cobra, the graffiti with the staff and the diamond, and then S, and then C, and all this other type of the pitchforks and stuff like that. And back then, of course, when I was walking home with with my brothers and a few of my friends, of course, I didn't know anything about what gangs were and stuff like that in that age. And all I kept on hearing about was these horror stories. And, like, didn't know much about them. And then later on in 1979, when I was about 8 years old, I remember seeing certain people, which I suspected to be them. And I noticed that there were like a large crowd of them. And of course, I was a kid. I don't remember too much on it, but I remember a lot of the punks there that hung around in my neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's where I grew up, and which I'm still living in now. And it was on the south side. So this is like the Milwaukee chapter of the Spanish Cobras. And from what I understand, they were like from the early 70s. And it was started from the Medina brothers. Richard Medina, which was known as King Cobra from Chicago. And I don't know which one of the brothers that came over here to Milwaukee that started the Milwaukee chapter. It was either Jamie Medina or his brother William, or maybe both of them ran it. I don't know. All I know was remembering the rumors about these guys and how serious of punks they were. And I remember another gang called the Rican Brothers, from what I heard from a lot of these old school people that I know growing up. And then later on in the early 80s, I heard about another gang called the Latin Kings. And these were the ones that I grew up with, especially in middle school and high school. I knew a lot of them, and my younger brother knew a lot of them. And I just saw the way they behaved, and even though I knew them well, I was never really good friends with them as far as wanting to hang out with them and stuff like that. I didn't see any future in it. I was too much. I didn't really care for that kind of thing. I thought it was kind of dumb. So I stayed away from trouble, and I just saw the way they ended up. Some of them ended up in prison. Some of them ended up in juvie and stuff like that, and even I remember some years later about one Latin King leader, which name was Carlos Hernandez. Hollywood, they called him. And when he died and he got gunned down many years later, and it's all because of these gangs and being affiliated and being involved with them. I'm just gonna tell you from my experience, even though I was never in a gang, but my brothers knew them just as well as I did and just saw the way they ended up. So for a lot of you, it's pretty much what I'm trying to say is there's no future in it. You're gonna end up either in prison or dead. So it's not a good thing. And I did do a video one time many years later in my old neighborhood that I got actually almost beaten to death by Latin Kings. But these are like the no, like the new school. Every generation, there's new faces and stuff like that. So the only ones I knew was the ones that I grew up with. And I saw them getting fights with other gangs, rival ones, and it just hurts me to see how my own people, Hispanics, the way they just make themselves look bad. And it's not really a good thing. And I noticed that when the Spanish Cobras and Latin Kings, when they first started, they started off kind of in a positive way. When, if you really think about it, they started off as a group of kids. Like for example, the Spanish Cobras were primarily a Puerto Rican gang. They were all Puerto Ricans. Later on, I don't know what other races joined up with them, but they were primarily a Puerto Rican gang. And then later on, other Latinos, other Chicanos or whatever, and whoever else joined up with them. Same thing with the Latin Kings. They started off as a club. And even in the early 60s, I'm not even sure if the Latin Kings of today, the ones that are 14 to 18 years old, are even aware of this, or even if they even give a shit about it. But they started off as a club in the early 60s, and they actually were involved in the civil rights movement. They cared about improving the community. They cared about protecting their own, protecting their territory, protecting their their neighborhood from bullies, from all these types of even white gangs or and other racist people, and even crooked cops at that time. And then things got bad later on when drugs started flowing the ghettos, and then they got involved in that, and so much of a mess came in, and there was so much corruption that got involved, and then they went from being this positive group to being a bunch of just sorry ass ignorant group of thugs. That's all they became. And even though the old school ones were not as bad as the ones that are right now, they were still bad though. I wouldn't call them, I wouldn't call them angels because they weren't. But they weren't as bad. But still, like I said before, there's no future in it. So for those of you who are in gangs right now, just take this as a message, Just don't get involved in this. There's no future in it. I mean, it's bullshit. And take it from me, I'm 47 years old. I'm about to be 48 in a couple of weeks. During my teenage years, I saw how they all ended up. You don't want to go down that road. You don't want to go, you don't want to end up in juvie. You don't want to end up, I know that some of you have probably dysfunctional families and your dad wasn't around, or your mom might be, a pain in the ass to you, and you might, and you're struggling. I can understand that. But there's nothing positive in being in a gang. There's nothing positive in that stuff. There's nothing positive in that shit. You're just like, I mean, do what you want. I'm just giving you advice. So I hope you make the right decision. If you have any questions or whatever, just post a comment and let me know. Until then, take care.